Hello, my name is Charlene Lee, and thank you for tuning in for my broadcast today. I'm going to be talking about how to create priorities, how to determine what you need to focus on, especially in these times of chaos and crisis. There's just so many things going on in the world right now, and it feels like it's all coming upon our shoulders as leaders. What do we focus on? What should be the top priorities? Like, give me the answer in a checklist already. And when is it going to stop? So just to give a litany of some of the things I've been hearing from leaders is now that we've dealt with this major crisis with COVID-19, we have a whole nother set of issues. Like, how do we open up again? How do we go back to normal work? How do we make sure we have enough cash, make sure that people are safe, both our employees and our customers? And then on top of that, we have the recession hitting. How are we going to recession proof our organization? How do we find growth opportunities? And then layered on top of that, we have all the turmoil that's going on right now around racial injustice and social equity and inequity. How do we address that even in our own organizations with our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs? Where do we put those really important issues on top of everything else? Oh, and don't forget, let's not forget about all the climate change, sustainability issues too going on. I mean, there's like so many things happening with all of this. How are you supposed to focus? And who knows where the next crisis is going to come from? Well, what I want to talk about today is how do we manage this? How do we start thinking about this in a systematic way, in an intentional way, so that we can figure out what to focus on and what we can, quote, safely ignore? I want to start out with a quote from back in 2006. There was an executive at Yahoo, and his name is Brad Garlinghouse, and he wrote this great document called the Peanut Butter Manifesto. And he was writing it as an open memo to leadership at Yahoo, but also to everybody. And what he wrote was this. I've heard that strategy described as spreading peanut butter across a myriad of opportunities that continues to evolve in the online world. Result is that there's a thin layer of investment across everything we do, and there's a focus on nothing in particular. So that's the biggest danger that I think is happening. That if you're focused on too many things, you tend to dilute all of them and then therefore never get anywhere. So what I want to talk about today is how do you actually create that focus? So I know that people are joining online. I would love to hear where you're coming from today. And also, what do you consider to be your top priority right now? The number one thing that before you do anything else, this is the most important thing that you have to do. And it's okay to admit, I really don't know. I am swirling around in circles, and basically my agenda, my calendar every day is dictated by what is urgent, what is piling on into my inbox, who's standing literally at my door and calling me on my phone. That is what I focus on. Are you focusing on the urgent, or are you actually focusing on the important? What's the really important things that you need to focus on in order for your business to not just survive, but to also thrive? So I just want to say hello to a few people. So Aparna, I think you recognize the Peanut Butter Manifesto. I was definitely around and covering Yahoo at the time. Man, what a crisis that was. But we all, for those of us who were in tech and in business at the time, we remember those moments well. So thank you for joining us, Denise from Kent in the UK. Thanks for joining, El Taher. And then Randy, this is great talking about that. It has a comment that it's the same issue, not only in business, but in product development. You may have too many features, and therefore you dilute the quality and the focus of the problem that you're trying to solve. So, and thank you, Randy, from joining from Saratoga. And it's interesting tidbit, Randy was at Yahoo when that Peanut Butter Manifesto was written. So a lot of personal experiences being built into this. So the thing that I'm hearing from some people are saying, like Leslie is focused on racial justice. Again, please feel free to chime in and say where you're coming from. It's always great to see where people are from. But also type into here, what are your priorities at this moment? What are the priorities of your organization? and name just one thing if that's possible. So what I want to go on and talk about are a couple of things. First of all, the reality is that we are focusing now on priorities that have changed for most organizations. In particular, what organizations are focused on right now in the past has always been the bottom line of profits to the shareholders. And back in August, the Business Roundtable here in the United States came out with a new purpose of the organization, which was to serve multiple stakeholders. The World Economic Forum also has come out and said we need to do more than just think about the profit motive. And this is what oftentimes people sometimes call the triple bottom line of not just profits, but also people and the planet. That's great. It sounds wonderful. But how on earth do you actually balance these three competing areas? Or in the case of the Business Roundtable, 5 different stakeholders of not just the shareholders, but your customers, your employees, your suppliers and partners, and also your community, which includes the planet. How do you start making these trade-offs? Because it seems so hard to do. And what I wanted to do was to posit one way to think about how to make those trade-offs. And that is to think about 3 levels of priorities. The first one is very much an important one, which is you need to focus on cash. If you don't have the cash to operate, we know that adage, cash is king. This is about survival. That has to be primary, because if you don't have the cash, nothing is going to happen if you're going to fall apart. And you won't have the ability to be able to give yourself options and optionality. But then the middle part is, what is the impact you want to have? And going across those 4 stakeholders that I talked about previously, who are the customers you want to serve? How do you want to serve them? And how do you do so in a way that is profitable for you, so you make enough money to replenish your cash, but also affordable for them? We're talking about employees, especially now as we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty about what the workplace looks like. How do we think about safety and security for them? But also, what kind of state are they in? How are they thinking about this? The issues around racial injustice, how is it impacting them? How are they thinking also about all the different priorities that are going on, not only at work, but also in their personal lives? Then we have suppliers, the partners. It's one thing to be able to have them, but if you're not paying them sufficiently enough, then they're going to go out of business, and that's going to impact your business. And then finally, we think about community, the planet. How do we take care of our community, ensure that there is equity, that there is sustainability in the way we do practices? And then also thinking about different issues. For example, do we provide healthcare, paid time off, so that our employees are safe? They don't come back to work sick, because this is so essential for them to have this job. Once you can figure out what those impacts and trade-offs are, then you can think about profits too as well. And I wish there was an easy formula that I could have, but I love this idea that there's no such thing as a perfect formula. There's no such thing as balance. There's just a series of less than optimal compromises, because in the end, there's only so much time. There's only so many resources, so many dollars that can go around. How do you start spreading them around across these different priorities? So I think one of the biggest issues right now is that the way that organizations have, especially for-profit organizations have, to measure impact is the simple spreadsheet. It's the simple balance sheet and income statement to understand value. And it's only in the context of value for shareholders, because it looks at the profit and the cash and the assets you have against the liabilities you have in an organization. We don't have a way to actually understand the value that is being created for customers, for employees, for our partners and suppliers, and especially for our planet, our communities. So how do we start doing this? Well, I think fundamentally we need to start having new metrics. It is the core of the research that I'm doing right now. I think it's going to be the focus, frankly, of my next book, because I don't know what the answer is. When I don't know the answer is, I get really curious and do a lot of research. But what I want to do and talk about today is really, how do you start thinking about what the priorities are that you have to have? And I think one great way to be doing this is to do scenario planning. Now, I've talked about scenario planning in previous broadcasts, and I'll include the link here to some of those resources. But scenario planning says, in the face of uncertainty, we can't plan and make decisions in the way that we did in the past. We can't just go from a forecast of what we did last year and know that it's going to be between 10 and 10% plus or minus from that forecast. Instead, we need to develop scenarios and to really think about what is the world going to look like. And this is a unique thing about prioritizing in a state of chaos and crisis, because you don't want to make too many commitments because you're afraid that things are going to change. What happens if suddenly something comes back? What happens if a second wave comes back and have to shut down again? Or what happens if the recession finally goes away and we've lost our opportunities to invest in growth? How do we think about all these things? And I think scenario planning is incredibly powerful because it says, given all of these unknowns, we're going to develop very robust scenarios. And then based on those scenarios, create robust strategies for each one. And then step back and look at the common moves that you would make across all of those scenarios and make those what we call the no regret moves. We're going to not regret anything that we laid down the foundation for and make those your priority moves at this moment. So just to give you some examples, this is some work from Trium. They do fantastic work. There's an entire scenario planning toolkit that I have linked in here. And they have formulated these 4 scenarios. And this is just one way to be thinking about it. But there could be a gradual recovery. We could see fits and starts continuing through the rest of the year. We could see ourselves in the perfect storm where things are just headlong, just deteriorating. Everything is going wrong. Or we could see the Great Awakening, where people are finally getting together, prioritizing the health of the planet, of our communities, and working together for solutions. I don't know which of these 4 is going to be the truth of what's going to happen. I've moved from fits and starts to right now it feels like a perfect storm, but maybe I'll go back to a gradual recovery. But I do feel certain that it's going to be something like this. And I have also prepared scenarios for each of these, I've prepared strategies for each of these scenarios. And that is the key, because if we can figure out what our options are, then we have greater security to say, okay, given all of these options, given all of these scenarios, which are the most important things that I need to do now that's going to position me well, no matter what happens. And this is, I think, extremely important and very difficult to do, because what we're asking you to do is to just prioritize a few things that you have to do extremely well. You can't do 15 things. You can't focus on a huge number of things and expect to do any of them well. And I love this quote from Warren Buffett, because he says, the difference between successful people and really successful people is that really successful people say no to almost everything. And this is, I think, so important, because unless you really focus on the most important things and practice the Pareto rule, that the 80-20 rule, that 20% of your efforts are going to result in 80% of the impact. If you're not really clear on what those things are, you have to get extremely clear right away and make sure that you don't do the other things. So I want to go through and say very quickly, this is the way that Warren Buffett recommends actually prioritizing. So I'm taking it straight from the wise sage that he is. And this is one wonderful way to actually start doing your priorities. So what he says is, make a list of your top 25 goals. Just go ahead, put them all down on a piece of paper. These are all the things that you could ever think of that you could spend your time on, and just write them down. Get them all down. And if you're doing this with your team, get everybody to participate in this. But then go through this list and pick your top 5 goals, just 5. Okay, we're not just saying like 1, but take those 5 goals. Which are the most important ones you have to do if you want to survive and thrive and find growth opportunities? Because that's, you know that these 5 things are so paramount that if you don't do these right, then you're going to be jeopardizing the future success of your organization. Then this is the key. Of those 5 things, make sure you cross out the other 20 and make sure that you're not going to do them. Commit to not doing them. This is, I think, the genius of this approach, because what it says is, what we're going to do, or we could do any of these 25 things. We know they're important, but these are the 5 things that are most important to us. And the reason why this is so important is that when the next time there's a fire drill coming in from right field and someone goes, we have to go do this. It's really important. It's urgent. It's a crisis. We have to deal with it. You look at those 5 things. You look at the things that you have determined when you're looking at things strategically and intentionally and saying, is this thing that's so urgent right now? Somebody's saying, knocking on the door and saying, we have to deal with this. Is it so important that it's going to move us away from these top 5 things? Or is it actually one of these other 20 things that we have decided that we're not going to focus on anymore? And then that gives you the permission then to say, no, we're not going to do that. I see why it's so important. But when you compare that to these other 5 goals that we have to focus on, it pales in comparison to how important these are. We have to stay the course. It's incredibly nerve-wracking because your natural urgency, your natural inclination as a leader is to deal with that problem. That's what we do as leaders. We solve problems, move things forward, we break down obstacles. But the minute you spend an ounce of energy, a minute of your time focusing on that thing that is not one of your 5 goals, you are falling behind. And then this is the last part. You have to focus not only on those 5 things, but you have to pick one. Just one thing that is the most important, and you work on that first. That means blocking out time on your calendar so you can actually get work done on these things. That means it's not just meeting time to talk about these things, but the actual work to do. So because if you don't block out that calendar, your time is going to get filled up with all these other things that are coming onto your calendar and forcing you to not focus on the most important thing you have to get done. So I keep going back to the fact that the ways that we're going to be able to be successful in this space is that we have to ruthlessly and consistently and commit to prioritizing. That is the most important thing you can do in the time of crisis. And that's your job as a leader. It is to be incredibly focused on what is the job to be done, what are the priorities we have to have in order to meet our overall goal and objective. The last thing I would say is that if you have any issues about what should be our objective, how should we be focusing on things, how do we think about how to order everything that we have, go back to your purpose, go back to your mission, go back to your values. I have talked about the importance of purpose, especially in times of crisis and chaos, because while everything is swirling around you, how do you remain focused on what's the most important thing to do? And I believe focusing on your purpose is the best thing you can do. Keep going back to that. And if your purpose isn't serving you today, if it's not really working for you, then maybe you need to go take a look at your purpose and say, how do we think about this? How do we use this on a day-to-day basis to help us make these priorities? So I just want to take a moment now to just acknowledge and see if there are any questions. But I also want to make sure that you have the information to be able to get all this great content. Hopefully it's helpful to you. But you can go and get these slides and see more information at charlene.com/crisis-priorities. And you can also see the previous recordings that I've done at that site, charlene.com/events. You're more than welcome to use these slides as you like within your organization, and I hope they're helpful to you. So I just want to take a moment and see if there are any questions we have here, some comments. Oh, there's a lot of people here. This is fantastic. So we have John joining us. Hey, John, how you doing? Great to see you. Jeff coming in from Palm Springs. Araparna, you're here down in LA. That's great, here in California. We have somebody tuning in from Sydney and from Kenya. And Arpana is saying as a priority is to create community and engender showing up for cause-related passions. Because physically, many of us can't. Leslie's focused on voting. We have people coming in from Kenya, from Peru. So this is a very diverse group, as you can see. So one of the questions that is coming in is, what are some of the indicators that's giving you some guidance that are we heading into the Great Awakening? I don't see very many. I wish there were more. The Great Awakening, the Great Correction is a time when we're actually making some significant shifts in the way that society is happening. And actually, I do think that this Great Awakening, Great Correction, part of the social justice movement is part of that. And there's a realization that we can't continue in the way that we have been, and that many of the problems, especially the racial dichotomy between people who are being impacted by COVID or not, are very socially and systematic in our society, at least here in the United States. And so I think there's a sense that while the pandemic is going to go through its fits and starts and do whatever it is, our reaction to it and the lessons we can learn from that is potentially letting us move into this space where we are thinking much more broadly about stakeholders. I fundamentally believe that we are entering into a new place where the purpose of the corporation has been fundamentally challenged, that it can't continue around just profits, and that we do have to make those investments into the other stakeholders. Let's see. There's a question from Kristen. Is it highly subjected to fast reappraisal? How are we potentially going to, I'm just going to read this question real quick. Is organizational agility a proof point? And is your ability to pivot quickly a really good thing? I have been studying disruptive organizations, and it is definitely one of the hallmarks of a disruptive organization is that they're able to respond very, very quickly to different circumstances that come up. And it's because they're wired in their strategies and their culture to be thinking about the future, thinking about where customers are heading. And so they're able to look into the future and then make the changes in their businesses accordingly. And they also have less time between cycles of decision making. They tend to go through and find minimal pieces of data, minimal amounts of data that's needed to move forward. And they're not afraid to test and try different things, see if it works, and then come back if it doesn't work. So there's a lot there around, I think we call it agility, a bias for action, but disruptive organizations do well in times of crisis and chaos and disruption because they're already wired to do this to themselves rather than let things do it to them from outside. So let's see. I think there's a few other questions here, and I think there's a lot of agreement from people. From Carlos and also from Aparna about the need for new metrics. I wish there was an easy button that I could push to deliver what those metrics are. What I'm hearing from a lot of organizations is it starts at the executive level and the board of directors level, where they say, we're willing to take a cut on the profits in order to advance these other stakeholders. We know that this is important and it's an investment into the future. So at this point, I'm going to close out the session here today. One thing I would encourage you to do is to come and check out the community we have at Quantum Networks. It is a group that I've been building to help disruptive leaders figure out how do we actually do things like prioritize? How do we develop our leadership? And next Monday, I'm going to be doing a short broadcast also around how do you think about having a career path as a disruptor? So that'll be interesting because I think career path and disruptor are not usually seen in the same sentence. But for those of us who consider ourselves to be disruptors, we definitely have something assembling a career path. So what does that look like? So I encourage you to come and check out some of the resources we have at Quantum and hope to see you again in the future broadcasts. In the meantime, good luck with your journey. Good luck with making these tough decisions about where to prioritize. Okay, thanks so much for watching. Have a good day.